Welcome to this Cambridge Marketing College webinar. My name is Neil Wilkins, and today we're going to talk about professional writing skills for marketers. Now, this is a topic that will help you to improve your thinking, confidently communicate more effectively, and ideally, and I'm sure this will happen, develop stronger marketing outcomes because clear writing builds all of these things, helps you to think more clearly, helps you to confidently communicate, and it will influence the marketing outcomes that you have. So in this session, we're going to develop some practical skills and approaches for writing professionally across all the different contexts of marketing that we have. So we're going to cover things like campaign commentary. We're going to look at effective reports, reflective learning, emails, obviously, because that one comes into everybody's remit, and also wider stakeholder communication. And marketing itself is, well, at the root of marketing is communication. So clear writing is going to influence pretty much everything. It's going to help you with customers' understanding of what your offers are. It's going to maintain the campaign effectiveness of the things that you're producing and putting out there in your marketing communications. It's going to help you to align your team if you're effectively communicating, and your assessment outcomes if you're here at the college doing some kind of study or apprenticeship. So I'd like you to think at the moment, really, just before we kind of get started, where does your writing most often influence outcomes in your role? Which of the things that we've briefly touched on so far, where are things that you would say, okay, well, that is actually when I'm effectively writing and writing really professionally, I get a good outcome. It really does influence kind of what happens at the next step in a project or a campaign. Are there certain media that you use? We've touched on email there, but also report writing and things like that. Or maybe you're putting a bid together for some budget or to suggest a new innovative campaign or something like that. You're making a suggestion. In what area does your writing most often influence outcomes? The outcomes that you see going forward? Because that's important, isn't it, really? If we start thinking about this, if we're going to develop professional writing skills, it's much, much more effective to go for the things where you're often seeing the most influence come through. But more generally, obviously, marketing has as a core capability this concept of writing. Professional marketers write constantly. They do campaign briefs, email copy, as we say, reports, strategy documents, social content, portfolio commentary. Writing quality will often shape your perceived competence in all of these things. If you are very kind of informal, a little bit loose, grammatically it's not strong, the structure isn't quite right, people kind of read it, they sort of get it, but it's not that clear, then there's room for improvement. And there is for all of us. I'm not talking about this and saying I couldn't improve. Yeah, we can all improve. There's always room for professional development here. So which of these writing tasks do you find most challenging? We all have preferences. Some of us are great at email, others at strategy. Some people are great at kind of telling stories through, say, a portfolio or something like that. Which one do you find the most challenging? Is there one that kind of sort of stands out to you as being, yeah, I'd really like to develop some skills and capability there because that would really help me? Maybe that's the one that you focus on as we go through this talk. Focus on that as the kind of almost the case study, if you like, for this professional writing skills talk. So there is obviously a cost of not doing this. You can just switch off now and sort of say, hey, I'm fine. It's all good. It's not a problem. I'll just carry on doing what I'm doing. But unclear writing can cause misunderstood campaigns. It can misalign your team or your colleagues. It can certainly delay decisions. That is absolutely key because people, they don't understand what they're reading and they are not going to really buy into it. And also, again, if you're studying here at the college, a weak assessment evidence, that is the cost of poor writing. I mean, poor writing is rarely about how intelligent you are, how smart you are in your work. It's usually about some things that we can all improve on, things like structure, things like discipline. I mean, have you ever had to rewrite something because it was misunderstood? I know I have. And of course, we have AI to help us along here because it can critique what we've written. It can give us a little bit of feedback if you tell it the audience that we're writing for. So, there's lots of different ways and tools and approaches you can take. But just think about the most recent example, possibly where you've had to kind of edit something or rewrite it or explain it more. Again, maybe that could be a good example to play with as we go through this. And I think what you're already picking up here is it is about clarity, and clarity comes before style. A lot of people say, oh, if I can dress it up in big words, I can make it just kind of look and sound impressive, and that'll do it. That isn't how professional writers do it. So professional writing prioritizes clarity above everything. And then it says structure, and then it says purpose, and then it says tone. So those are four key checkpoints. And style should serve clarity, not replace it. Okay, so you've got clarity, structure, purpose, and tone. Those are the four kind of key foundations, I guess you could call them. And then the style comes in to make it personal. It makes it a way that kind of sounds like you. It feels as though it's coming from a specific individual. But the clarity, structure, purpose, and tone gives that structure, that framework, if you like. Because if people don't understand you, they can't agree with you. Harvard Business Review quote there. If people don't understand you, they can't agree with you. So this is super important. It really is. I mean, do you prioritize currently sounding impressive, or do you prioritize being clear? Now, be honest here when you answer that question. You trying to sound good and trying to sound smart, or are you actually trying to get a message across? Because those two things do not sit comfortably side by side. The preference here is clarity before trying to sound impressive or being impressive, even. If you can speak in very, very simple terms, get your message across, get agreement, you can then move on. If you try and dress it up to kind of big it up, if you like, then it's not going to work. It really is as simple as that. So it's really important. So let's break these down and go a little bit deeper into these. So first of all, let's think about structure. So you need to start with purpose. What is the purpose? What outcome do you want from this writing? So before writing, ask, what is the reader trying to learn from me? What decision or action should then follow? This is part of the communication intent model. What is the reader trying to learn? Or you could say, what am I trying to share with the leader? Because I know they need to know this. And then what decision or action should follow? Because if there is no action following up, if there is no reason to listen, people won't listen. If there's no reason to read, people will not read. So think in this structure then: purpose, message, structure, delivery. It's a kind of a nice sort of flow there as you start to think about actually what is it that we're doing here? Why am I doing it? This is, the fundamental why. Starting with purpose gives the reason for somebody to engage with your writing. You can then start to build that out. You can flesh this bit out. So the pyramid principle talks about then starting with the main message. Start as you mean to continue. Start with the thing you want people to remember. And then what you're going to do then is group supporting arguments, provide evidence underneath that, because readers prefer conclusions first. If you're anything like me, I would naturally think, I want to tell the story and I want to lead the person to the end result. But the person actually wants to know the end result at the start as well. So it's kind of a topping and tailing. It's a sort of a before and after situation here. Because if they know the answer and then you start to justify it, you support it, you provide the evidence, then they can get that confidence that, oh, okay, I get this, I understand this, what you're telling me. But if they just hear the storytelling, I mean, you know as well as I do, people's minds drift. So tell them what you're going to tell them, then provide the evidence, and then conclude it. So do you usually begin writing with the background instead of your main point? It would be a natural way for me to do it. So I'm sure I'm not alone here. It may well be that you don't naturally think of, I'm going to tell them the answer and then I'm going to explain it. But I've seen that when I've been in teaching sessions or in workshops, when I've been explaining something to a group. If I tell them what we're going to, what the answer is and what we're going to find, and then I go back and then we reverse engineer to then meet that answer. So the storytelling supports what they already know. And that's a much easier thing to do when you're writing, is to actually help people, guide them to a point where they actually do know it. Now, you might think, well, that's a little bit boring, isn't it? Because there's no surprise. But actually, people don't really like surprises in this context. So get that piece in first, get that structure with the answer at the beginning, and you will find it's a real game changer. It genuinely is. So, structuring things like marketing reports, for example. So, a practical report structure could be something like this: context, objective, activity or action, the thing that's going to happen, the result, the interpretation, and then a recommendation. I mean, this structure works for campaign reporting, portfolio evidence sharing. It works just as a standard kind of structure really effectively. I mean, it's a really, really good thing that this can be working for. So I would say that this is going to be really, really strong if you do this. So, I mean, when you're doing these kinds of reports, if you just kind of reflect for a moment in terms of the sections that you most often omit, do you omit the context, the objective, the action or activity? Probably you would include the result. Yeah, almost certainly. But then the interpretation and a recommendation. Remember, we're always looking for action afterwards. So is that kind of included every time? We don't always follow these structures, do we? But if we do, there's a great opportunity here to really, really up the professionalism of what we're doing. And what we can also do when we're doing these kinds of reports or this kind of presentation of a portfolio, for example, is we can do the so what test. I find myself saying this quite a lot because this one at the moment comes across in all different guises, but it's so important. After every paragraph, when you're writing, ask, why does this matter? What does this change? And what should happen next? I mean, this will transform any kind of generic, kind of woolly, loose description into analysis. It really, really helps to entrust almost the confidence in your reader's mind that they're actually on a good journey, because that is what you want them to do. You want them to stay with you. So, where in your writing currently does the reader still need to ask that so what? Is there anything I could be reading that you've created where it would be, well, I'm not really quite sure why that matters, or what does this actually change? I'm not really sure. And often this is in the case of where we're padding stuff because there's often word count, or maybe there's an expectation from your line manager or from the management team that, well, you need to give me more detail. Whereas actually, do they really need more detail? Maybe if you were more precise and actually followed those earlier structures, they would already have their answer. They would already have bought in. So the so what test enables you to sort of enhance your structure by taking out the bits that are pretty obsolete. And let's face it, a lot of us actually do include those in our writing a lot of the time. So what we're looking to do then is to start by building up and actually enhancing and getting closer to some of the clarity and language that we would then put into our structure. So things like active versus passive voice, this is really key. Professional writers, particularly marketers who are super effective, know the difference between active voice and passive voice. So a passive voice would be the campaign was launched by the team. An active voice would be our team launched the campaign. Just think how that sounds. I tried to keep it at a very kind of same sort of tone of voice when I said it, but just think how that lands with you. The campaign was launched by the team, or our team launched the campaign. Which one feels more active? Which one improves clarity and accountability? Which one's got ownership? Which one feels more confident and clear? Well, clearly it's the active one. Our team launched the campaign. There's ownership, responsibility, accountability, and clarity. The campaign was launched by the team. It's just so passive. It just so meh. It just so kind of drifts past you, and nobody's going to keep hold of it. So, do your sentences clearly show who's responsible? Do you take ownership either as a we, as a team, as a collective, or as an I? The I one is also very, very good in professional writing. When you write in first person, it's like, oh, this person's up the game. This person is actually really owning this stuff. Okay, now I'm listening. What have you got to share with me? Is the kind of mindset invariably that you'll see if you do that. And what we're not looking for, obviously, when we go down this sort of route, is jargon. Marketers love a bit of jargon, don't we? We really do. We've got acronyms, we've got metaphors, we've got terminology that nobody else understands. But avoiding jargon is professional writing because jargon creates barriers when readers don't share the same expertise. So instead of something like leverage omni-channel engagement synergies, you could actually say use multiple channels together to reach customers. I mean, think of that. Leverage omni-channel engagement synergies. I mean, agencies use that. People who are a little bit underconfident would use phrases like that. I mean, I don't even understand what that means myself. But if you say, I'm going to use multi-channel, multiple channels together to reach customers, well, it's like, yeah, okay, get that. Okay, what are we going to do? Which channels, which customers? Do you see what is happening here? The clarity without jargon enables somebody to come on that journey with you. I mean, reflect just for a moment for yourself. What jargon appears most in your marketing communication? Are there certain phrases that you use? I mean, I'm not saying don't use phrases. I'm not saying don't use some of this more complicated terminology if the audience is willing and able and it's appropriate for them to accept it. But a lot of the time, plain English wins out every single time. And big words, knowing big words is not a clever thing. Okay. I mean, I think we've all been through this in our careers, whether you're brand new into your career, whether you're really experienced. We've either met people or we've done it ourselves. I know I have in the past. I've kind of figured out now it really doesn't work. It doesn't actually make you sound good. It just makes you more distant to the audience, and that isn't what we're looking for. So avoid those things in your writing. And then we can move into things like tone and professionalism. So professional writing should be, and well, not should be, must be really clear, respectful, confident, and objective. So we don't want to be using overly casual language. We don't want too much emotional baggage there or emotional exaggeration. And we certainly don't want ambiguous claims. So we need to strike this balance because we need writing that sounds professional without becoming impersonal. So when I say clear, respectful, confident, objective, it sounds very kind of bullet point. It sounds very kind of almost harsh. It doesn't have a softness. It doesn't have a personality to it. But that's not what I'm saying. It does need to have that. But it's when you take it just too far, so overly casual, using, as we say, jargon or using slang or using emojis and things like that. That's not professional writing. It mustn't be emotionally charged, should we say. So you want to keep it nice and level. You want to show passion, you want to show commitment, but you don't want to overly exaggerate those things. And the claims need to be really tight, really well sourced, and they need to be kind of confidently delivered. So ambiguous claims, no good at all. Okay, so you've got to be a little bit logical here, but bring personality and life to it in the tone of voice. And also having an audience awareness. I mean, I often find myself kind of reporting to or writing for or presenting to very diverse audiences, diverse in terms of the level of experience, maybe the disciplines are very, very different because different readers expect different writing styles. I mean, if you think about, different levels of people that you write for, senior leaders particularly want key points, outcomes, and recommendations. They don't want the detail. They don't need the detail. They're making decisions at a higher level, if you like, a broader level, not necessarily higher, but a broader level. That's what they're doing. But your peers probably want process, context, and detail. So they want a little bit more detail. They want to know the reason why. So the context is there, but they also want to feel part of the process. So if you're writing for somebody, they need to see themselves fitting into what you're writing. Otherwise, why would they be interested? So think about balancing those things for the different readers that you're writing for. And the big question is, do you adapt your writing style to different readers already? I mean, some of us do. I think people who are more kind of, I guess, empathic, I mean, they're more in tune with the audience naturally, just because that's their personality style or preference, probably find this bit easier to do. For some of us, we have to think a little bit harder. Who am I writing for? Okay, I'm not going to write as me. Well, I'm going to kind of write as me, but I'm going to write as me for this person. And that often is quite a nice balance because you don't want to lose the you. It still needs to be you sharing the writing experience, but it's where it's going to land that is important. And of course, you can think of your reader as a customer. So they are really in terms of the customer to your messaging. So that's a nice one to do. Then we can move into the reason or the reasoning behind professional writing. If we think about some of the things that you would want to be including here, persuasion is a really key one. I've said a couple of times already the fact of the kind of the so what is the next step, or in marketing speak, here's a marketing jargon, the call to action. What is it I want somebody to do as a result of reading what I've just written? And so persuasion, encouraging them, enticing them, guiding them towards this call to action or this action they need to take after the reading, you could describe as persuasion. There are many, many models of persuasion, some that go back literally millennia. Aristotle's persuasion model, which includes three elements, ethos, logos, and pathos, is it kind of just a really, really smart little checklist of kind of the balance of the things. If you want to persuade somebody, you've got to be showing credibility. So you've got to give them evidence that, okay, you know your stuff. Not that it's over clever, not that it's over smart or full of jargon, but just like, okay, I'm dealing with a professional here. And then it's logical reasoning. They need to see the story, the way that you've built up your argument. That's key. And then they need to see the emotional relevance. Why should I buy into this? Why should I want to get involved? Why should I want to then take an action? Strong marketing writing uses all three. So if you're talking about writing internally, we've just had a few examples there of writing for colleagues or, members of our own business. But of course, if you're using this publicly in your marketing communications to customers or stakeholders, you'll notice that actually the most effective writing uses all three. It needs to be credible, needs to be logically reasoned, and it needs to have an emotional relevance. I love those three kind of, sections, if you like, of this persuasion argument, because a lot of us don't rely on all three. A lot of us kind of tend to go for one or other. Either we push the credibility, hey, look at my qualifications, or we push the logical reasoning. It's look, I've really worked this out for you. Or we go down the emotional relevance. It's like, love me, come on my journey with me. I'm amazing, and this is all going to be really exciting. We don't balance the three. If you can balance the three, that is professional writing. So if you find yourself skewed towards one of these three, there's an opportunity to come a little bit tighter here. It's a great little journey to play with in some of the writing that you might be about to do. And within this, of course, is this credibility thing, is the evidence. So using evidence effectively. Good professional writing will always include data, always include examples, benchmarks, research references. It's a really interesting one here because there will be times when the story is enough, but in the most instances, actually, you do have to justify what you're writing. It does kind of help. It's one of those things where you think, well, if I have to justify it, it's probably not that strong an argument then, is it? But the answer is actually the opposite. Our extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, said Carl Sagan, one of the great minds of the 20th century. He was basically saying in that point is that, look, if you really want to get people on board, you're going to have to provide some really, really strong evidence because you're the custodian of this stuff. You're not the owner of it. The ultimately, the original idea didn't necessarily come from you, but you're now the custodian of this message in your writing. So you do need to be including, extraordinary evidence that will actually then back up and provide this credibility to what you're writing. And that will help to persuade somebody to actually then take action after reading. So it is really, really important that. We're also thinking as well for writing for different marketing contexts. And we have in marketing, obviously, many different contexts. If we're writing the campaign commentary, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, our commentary should explain what was done, why it was done, what happened, and what was learned. So avoid simply describing the activity. A lot of the time, what we find is that people, particularly if you're creating a portfolio for assessment, for example, is that you'll be very good at describing what you did. but not actually why you did it, not actually then what happened as a result. And particularly the big gap is kind of what was learned as a result of whatever it was that happened. So we're doing maybe two things out of those four, but a campaign commentary or a piece of portfolio evidence should include all four. So rather than just simply describing, think about that balance. As you're seeing here, there's a lot of kind of checklists here that give you a balance, a broader kind of view of your writing. So does your commentary explain reasoning as well as actions? Because it really does need to. So maybe reflect on that and think, is there something I could actually do to maybe expand out or maybe make it slightly broader? Because that could be a really useful approach here. The next thing is writing reflective assessments. Reflection is really, really important to do both professionally and personally. Reflection requires an honest evaluation, just being honest with yourself, identification of improvement areas, both professionally and personally, and evidence of learning. So we've got this Kolb's reflective learning cycle, which can be a really nice little one. Again, just another little checklist when you're writing a reflective assessment. Experience, reflection, learning, application. It's a great little kind of process that you can think about. I've got this experience. I've reflected on this experience. This is what I've learned, and here's how now I'm going to apply that learning. So when you reflect and when you write your reflective notes or journals, does your reflection focus more on events or on the learning? Because ultimately it's the learning. It's the reason you're reflecting isn't, oh, look at me, aren't I clever? Or, oh, I really beat myself up on that one because that wasn't so good. It's actually, well, what did I learn as a result of it? Because that is, again, when we're professionally writing, not only for others, but for ourselves, that is absolutely key. I mentioned right at the start of this talk, writing professional emails. I don't know how many emails you'll be writing every day, but I know for me, it's a lot. So professional email writing is absolutely clear as a key thing that we need to do as marketer. So effective professional emails include a clear subject line. You need to make sure that people aren't going to scroll past it. So no silly kind of little lowercase or emoji kind of driven subject lines. It's got to be precise. It's got to be clear. Short opening context, again, sets the scene. It's a scene setter that encourages somebody not to just quickly swipe past it, but actually stop and dwell to hook into it. The key message that then comes next, because having then done the short opening context, the key message is this is what we're talking about here. And then an action or a request. If it takes more than two paragraphs, then it probably isn't an email. It could be a conversation, it could be a report or a presentation. So you should be able to get your emails into two paragraphs. Anything shorter than that, and you could argue, is this an email or is this a quick little WhatsApp or a quick little phone call? But if it's longer than that, then there's definitely a different format. So how often, just reflect on this for a moment, how often do your emails contain more information than necessary? Do you heavily load them? Do you story tell? Do you give this huge, great long piece, which is almost like a blog or an article, rather than something that's very short, very precise, very action oriented? Maybe try that for the next few emails that you send and see what happens. I'm not saying that every single scenario is going to fit this model, but just try it when you can and see the difference in your normal style versus this very tight professional email style. It could be quite profound. And so when you've got your content in whatever form you're doing, whatever kind of media you're using, you then need to be aware that editing and improvement is key. So never then just press the send button, never just do the print button and then distribute your report. Strong writers edit carefully. So editing checks the structure, the clarity, the tone, the accuracy, and the length. Writing is rewriting, said Ernest Hemingway, and Ernest Hemingway is, I guess, relatively famous writer. So yes, this is the thing that we all need to spend a little bit more time on. And maybe it's 80-20, 80% creating it, 20% in the editing. You might decide actually it's a slightly different balance, but to me, that would be as much time as I would be, I guess, confidently willing to associate with the editing, but do not press send without rereading what you've done. Structure, clarity, tone, accuracy, and length. That is your checklist for ensuring that this message, this writing professionally is going to land. So do you edit systematically, or do you only do it when something looks or feels wrong? Because this needs to be a habit. If we're habit stacking professional writing, this has got to be in that stack. It's so, so important. And it will mean you don't then get comeback. It will mean that you can then proceed with the rest of your day, having sent that email or distributed that report with confidence, knowing it's going to land, the actions are going to be taken, and then you can get on with the next thing you need to do in parallel. So strong editing is almost as important, if not more important, than strong writing. It gives you that second chance to just tighten things up and make sure it's great. And as part of that, I would suggest doing some readability testing. There are many tools that will check for clarity. We've got writer.com, Grammarly, and one of my favorites, which is Hemingway Editor, AIs that will actually read the content that you're doing. And all we're looking for really from these in terms of readability is readable conversational flow. We just want to help our reader to flow through the words that we've shared with them. It is nothing more complicated than that. It really isn't. They need to enjoy the flow. They need to be educated, informed, and maybe entertained even. Depends obviously on what you're sharing with them and what you need to get as an action from them. But all of those things come into this readability. I mean, do you test your writing using any kind of readability tool? You would be surprised how much more simple these readability tools will make your writing. It will dumb it down, I guess some people would say, and that's absolutely fine. This is going to make it much easier to consume by the other person. So again, this is helping us to come away from that overcharged, over jargonized, too much evidence, too much kind of loading, if you like, of our writing. If we can do the readability test, we'll be in a much better way, or much better place to get this to land properly. And of course, alongside that, we want to then do a sort of a professional writing checklist as well. So before sending or submitting, just double check, is the purpose clear? Is the structure logical? Is the language simple? Is the tone appropriate? And is the message actionable? I love this list. I just almost have this list. Well, I have it in my head now because I've done this one so many times, but I would have this on a little post-it note on the side of my computer, and it would just be every time I send something, is it clear purposefully? Is it structured logically? Is the language nice and tight and simple? Is the tone appropriate for this person I'm writing to? And is the message actionable? Is it super clear what I want this person to do? Because checklists reduce errors. They reduce the need for somebody to come back and say, so what do you need from me then? Or didn't really get that bit, or can you provide more information about, or can we have a meeting around this? If you do this checklist, you should not need any of the above because you've provided it and supplied it. So think about your writing today, what your next thing, your next writing task is going to be. Which of these checks, if there's anything in here that you don't naturally normally do, which of these checks would improve your writing most if you were to do them today? Purpose clear, structure logical, language simple, tone appropriate, and message actionable. That is a really, really strong professional writing checklist. And what we're doing here as part of this kind of improvement of our professional writing skills, and we're all on a journey, me included, is what we're doing is we're developing writing confidence. The more you do this stuff, I just mentioned their habit stacking, the more we write, the more we improve through practice because confidence will grow through frequent writing in this way, through getting the feedback. And that isn't necessarily somebody actually telling you, but just you noticing that actually that flowed through more easily than it would normally. Let's reflect. Let's go back and do that journal. Let's go and see why. So the feedback and then the iteration is key here. This is what we're building here, is this kind of natural habit of doing this without almost thinking. Reading strong examples is also a really good thing. I mean, be on the lookout for when somebody writes to you something, a report, an email, whatever. When it hits the mark, when it really impacts and you think, oh, that was good. then what was it in that example that really stood out to you? Because we can learn from others here. You will be getting today, undoubtedly, some really good writing that comes in your direction through a blog that you see, an article that you read, something you see online, through a colleague, your manager, whoever. Professional writing is a learned skill. So learning from others, even though they don't even necessarily know that you're learning from them, is a really key thing. And also asking for feedback on your writing. Asking, maybe somebody initially quite close to you and say, can you just tell me what you thought of that? Was it clear what I wrote? Was it obvious? Did you know what I wanted you to do as a result of reading this thing or this report? And see what feedback you get. If you can get people being really honest to you, that's a really great kind of feedback loop that will help you continuously hone your writing skills. So I would definitely encourage you to do that. And maybe as part of doing that, you start to see that as part of what you might term a personal writing toolkit. Um, for me, I would add in ChatGPT as well for drafting ideas. I mean, very, very few times now I'm actually coming up with the original ideas. So I will use it as a kind of a first start when I'm writing a report, a presentation, not necessarily an email because that's more flowy, I guess, for us. But, when it's a sort of a more detailed document or something that I need to write, yeah, that would be a certain sort of first pass would be with GPT. I'd be then thinking about something like Hemingway for clarity, maybe Grammarly for editing, just to make sure. And then Notion or Word templates, they're all there for structured reports. We can use tools to support our thinking. It's not replacing it. It doesn't mean all these things, then we just press go, the agent then does it and off they go. I mean, that's the agent writing. What we're talking about here is our own personal professional writing skills. So use these tools and actually position these tools as supporting you and your thinking, not getting in the way or replacing. So when I say these things, when I kind of sort of do this little checklist of, is it the before, GPT? Is it the during, Hemingway and Grammarly? Or is it the after, when you come back and you actually edit and sort of improve the final output? Which one of those would help you the most right now? Because that is something maybe to start with as a starting point, because you may well be very proficient in a number of the things, if not many of the things that we've talked about here today. But if there are one or two things and you think, don't really do that, that could be a game changer, then maybe that's your starting point for now. But of course, those journeys through those checklists are going to be, I guess, for all of us, really. So, final thoughts, just bringing this to a close, this professional writing skills for marketers, really just to kind of reflect on that professional writing is not about sounding clever. It really, really isn't. Professional writing is about helping your reader to understand, to trust, and then to act. It is as simple as that. You will have got your message across, they will have understood it, and then the action then happens. That is really professional writing in a nutshell. Clear thinking becomes clear writing, says George Orwell. So taking the time to reflect, taking the time to go a little bit more slowly rather than just getting those words out is probably going to be a faster process, ironically, than actually trying to do it quickly. So actually thinking and getting these good habits in place is key. And so I'd encourage you to think, which writing habit are you going to change or improve or focus on after this session? Because somewhere tucked inside all of these little ideas, all of this narrative is your key to become a more professional writer as a marketer and as a business professional.